Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Ultra Rare Podcast. It is our third day in a row with an episode. We're keeping it moving, having a lot of fun. And speaking of fun, these are some pretty great grids that we had today for both Doku and Grid. I can't wait to get into it. Let's start right off. So I've been over it by now. Starting from the left, we're just going to go through all the grounds just to start. So first we have ground evolved by trade. Again, I feel like I should just preface that Doku, as per usual, is in just a horrible mood and decided to give me evolved by trade again. There's only 3 ground types that evolve by trade: Golem, Rhyperior, and Steelix. Pretty difficult. I did actually use a strategy for this one though, so I can tell you more than just know it. Steelix levels up evolves rather, using the Metal Coat, which is also used for Scizor and maybe something else, but I really only know it for Steelix and Scizor. I knew in my head that Scizor used Metal Coat, and I also knew that Steelix used Metal Coat, but I know that Scizor is a trade evolution. So I just kind of put the dots together. I thought, well, Metal Coat must have a relation with trading, and as you can see, Steelix was the least common pick, still 20%, so you can't really know it's the least common pick until the end, but Rhyperior was also a great one, just 7% over, and Golem was pretty popular, which is actually surprising because I would think of Rhyperior a million times over more than I think of Golem. But only 88% of people got this, which is, all things considered, a relatively difficult box. I would have just been happy to get it, personally. Moving on, we have Ground Middle Evolution. There are a few of these, about 10, maybe 9. They are something like Graveler, Rhydon, Krokorok, Vibrava, Gabite, things of that nature. There's some more niche ones like Pupitar and Palpitoad and Piloswine, which are pretty darn difficult. I wouldn't like to do that. Um, yeah, really rough. I mean, 3-stage lines just are not that common, and the first ones you kind of think of are probably Graveler, which is why Graveler is the most common one. Rhydon was the second one. Not a lot of people know that Rhydon is ground type. Rhyperior gains the rock typing, but it could also gain the ground type. It's not an immediate assumption you can make. So I think Rhydon's just difficult to guess. Krokorok is difficult to remember that it exists. I personally went with Vibrava, which was a little bit of a cop-out answer. Or not a cop-out. I mean, it was just a relatively common answer because I'm just thinking Trapinch, I'm thinking Flygon, and funnily enough, I could not, guys, I was sitting there trying to figure out, I knew Vibrava, I knew, what Trapinch evolves into, but I could not think of its name for so long, and I finally got it. I always get confused with Yanmega. Anyway, finally got Vibrava down. Gabite is a really good one, and kind of one of those that you don't think about. When you think about, ground type full things, I mean, specifically, when you think about Garchomp, you don't think about, oh, that's a ground type triple thing. You think, oh, that's a triple dragon type. So Gabite was definitely a harder one to dig into. Marshtomp is pretty difficult because Marshtomp actually has a pretty uncommon trait of picking up the secondary ability before he hits his 3rd evolution line, which doesn't apply to all triple evolution lines, but specifically for starters, that is very uncommon. I feel like most notably I know Florigato or what am I thinking here? Torracat, yeah, that Linton evolves into, they do not get that secondary ability until they reach, or secondary type, sorry, until they reach that final evolution. So Marshtomp isn't immediately obvious, and that's probably why it was so rare. Piloswine was good, Palpitoad is good, Pupitar is good. Pupitar is one of those that you think of, you don't really associate it with, again, a triple stage evolution. You kind of just, same with Gabite, Pupitar isn't a ground type. And also, very interestingly, Pupitar evolves into a rock type. The line that is a very interesting thing that I've actually never really understood before. For this line is that Tyranitar is a rock type, not a ground type, but Pupitar is a rock ground type that loses its ground typing to turn into dark for Tyranitar. It's a really weird evo, but I can 1000% see why it is the least common because, I mean, who could possibly know that Pupitar picks up the ground type evolution? And maybe you did. Maybe you had the most unique answer, which is great. But, I mean, Vibrava wasn't too bad. Honestly, if you didn't do Graveler, you didn't do too bad. Even Rhydon or Krokorok are 13 under the most common, which, I mean, once you get under 10%, you're kind of grasping at straws. Even Pupitar and my pick of Vibrava were only 6% apart, which is really nothing when you think about a Doku, when you're not really hunting for leaderboards or anything. So a bit of a yap there, but we're moving on to Ground Ghost. Now, there are 6 of these. Some of the most obvious ones you would think of are Palossand to me, and Golurk is like the staple of the Ground Ghost. Golurk was the most popular. The least popular was Yamask Galar. I went with Runerigus, which is the evolution of Yamaskalar. One of my favorite things, or least favorite things about the Pokemon games, rather, is that Runerigus is a ground ghost type and isn't a rock ghost type, which doesn't exist, as if we needed any more ground ghost types. They decided to make it one as well, instead of making it made out of rocks, which I ran about a lot, and that's one of those things where it's kind of on my mind, and ground ghost, well, I'm upset that it's a ground ghost, but I know it's a ground ghost. So I got to use it here. It felt like a great answer. It's actually not that great. It's only 3% under Golurk. Runerigus was a pretty popular Pokemon. Even Sandygas is lower. And the reason I imagine Sandygas is lower is because people don't know if Sandygas has picked up that ground type evolution yet. I mean, I'd be more nervous about the Ghost thing, but again, it isn't immediately obvious. And Palossand is much more Earth-like, if you had to make a guess. Golett, again, you don't know if he's picked up that typing yet. Yamaskalar, 1000%. You don't know if he's picked up that typing yet, and we'll go over it later because I did end up picking Yamaskalar later. But it's just a ghost with a rock on it. You really don't, which is why it should be a ghost rock type. But you really don't know if it has that ground typing until it turns into that big rock wall, Rock wall. So, Yamaskalar, by far, I mean, by a staggering margin, he was the least common. The second least common was 14%. So he is down almost 4%. Pretty special. That's it for ground. It's a pretty well-known type, so I don't think a lot of people had issues with this. Yeah, the biggest problem was that evolve by trade, but besides that, it's pretty easy. Moving on to dual type for all of these. A dual type evolve by trade is nearly all of the trade evolutions. I mean, not all of them, but it's pretty uncommon to not have a fully evolved Pokemon not be a dual type. Something like all of the Gourgeist forms worked. Slowking is a great one. Rhyperior, Kingdra, Trevenant, Golem, who we just used. And Golem was pretty low here, I would imagine, because first of all, people don't know that it's dual type. Golem isn't immediately, obviously, a rock ground type. That's sort of difficult because any ground type could be a rock ground type, and I don't think they'd be wrong in saying that. Steelix is a pretty niche one. Again, probably already used in another box. I think that definitely brings something like Steelix and Golem down as well. There's Golem Alola, which isn't immediately obvious because Alola might have a different way of evolving it. I mean, we see that with Yamask Galar. Scizor, Escavalier, and Gengar was by far the most common. I think that's a pretty obvious one. Escavalier is also a really great pick in my opinion, but still remained pretty common. But anyway, this is a pretty, simple box. Again, just try to think trade evolutions. Something like Gengar, will probably be first to your mind. I think Haunter's a pretty iconic trade evolution. But even Scizor is really obvious to me. Although, I have a super special appreciation for all of these people who knew that Gourgeist was a trade evolution. I had no idea, and I can't wait to use that knowledge in the future. I love using Gourgeist in every excuse I got. I had no idea Gourgeist evolved by trade. Again, Gourgeist has 4 forms, which basically means anybody who thinks of Gourgeist, the amount of percent Gourgeist would have, divide it by 4, which is the same with Aegislash, usually makes what is a pretty thought of Pokemon into immediately a not very common pick. Gourgeist is a great guess here, and Gourgeist Super specifically was the least common, but they were all pretty much hovering around the exact same size. Now we have dual type middle evolution. There's quite a few of these. I could never read the whole list, but I think that's definitely a dodgy one because, again, a lot of things aren't going to get that dual typing until they fully evolve, and I tried to be super careful about it. Carkol was the least common, and I actually have a strong history with Carkol and Colossal. I use Carkol and Colossal all the time. I would have never put any money on Carkol having the fire typing before evolving into Colossal. There are a lot of great picks here, though. Charjabug is a great one. I feel like that's kind of a guarantee. Sliggoo, you can see it in the picture that it's a guarantee. Trumbeak, I love Trumbeak already. Magneton is just well known. Golbat's a pretty clear one in my opinion. Mr. Mime Galar, if you can remember that it exists, is still a pretty clear one. These are, it's such a broad category. The most common was 11%, but that is by a super long margin. It goes from 11 to 9 to 4. So, Ivysaur and Haunter were the 2 most obvious ones. Again, try to stick out of Gen 1, please. Dartrix is a pretty good one up there, and Dartrix is an example of a starter getting its typing. Rowlet gets the flying typing in its base form, and then evolves into Dartrix, who still has flying, which then converts into Ghost. So that whole middle evolution not always getting the last type thing does not apply at all to multiple lines. And I hope that's not contradictory to anything I said earlier. I, I tend to, whenever I speak about these grids or do them, I have a lot of, I retain knowledge very easily. I'll mention something, I'll talk about it, and then I'll end up using it very soon after. And that happened again today. I used Arctibax because I think the other day we were talking about how, again, this fear that the final evolution does not have that typing, but Arctibax did. And I used Arctibax. It was, pretty rare. Everything was kind of rare here. Again, there's a million different options. Uh, but I think it should be a pretty simple box. Try not to take a huge risk. Like, you don't need to risk putting. Some of these make sense, but I would never risk. Meryl is scary. I would because I know. I wouldn't risk Swellis. I wouldn't risk Celio. I wouldn't risk Pignite at all. Those are definitely super scary. I mean, again, everything I just mentioned was viable, but I'm just saying stick to your bounds. Don't do something crazy ambitious, like hope that someone has that dual typing before they do. I wouldn't hope that Curlia has the fairy typing before it evolves, even though it does. Things like that. Again, lastly, moving on to Ghost dual type. This should be pretty easy. Almost there's very little mono Ghost types. That's actually more of a difficult conversation. Basculegion took the cake here. I think nobody knows what Basculegion is anyway. Basculegion would have been one of the least common had it not already had two forms, which makes it even more rare. So Basculegion, a great one, a water ghost type. Definitely try to use Basculegion as much as possible. Again, it's one of those new ones that people really don't know that well. Typhlosion Hisui is a great one, just again, new. Blacephalon is great. Dreepy, my beloved Necrozma Dawn. I definitely could have done that, but I was kind of on the fix of my Runerigus and Yamask Galar, so I went with Yamask Galar because I don't think it's immediately obvious that Yamask, again, has that ground typing. But there are just a million of these. Every ghost type essentially is usually a dual type, so try to think of one, but there were some really stellar picks here. And Gourgeist, again, Gourgeist and Pumpkaboo were viable, and I probably should have used them, and you should use them. I wouldn't say there's any situation where, unless you have a really great, you know, unless you were thinking, Basculegion, I don't think there's any way you can ever go wrong with running Gourgeist or Pumpkaboo or like something like a Minior. I think they're all excellent picks. That's kind of it for dual type. We're gonna go Psychic Evolve by trade. There's only two, and I'm gonna be honest. I didn't know. I knew Alakazam. I don't want to say that's obvious because maybe it's not to you. There's only two, which makes this immediately a difficult box. I knew Alakazam. Alakazam and Slowking are the only psychic types that evolve by trade. Slowking is a pretty iconic one because, not iconic, but it's pretty easy to remember because that metal coat thing I was talking about earlier. Slowking trades with the King Rock, which evolves it, which makes it a little bit easier to call to mind. It's not just a base trade. But still, only 20% of people thought Slowking, and the rest, like me, copped out and went Alakazam, which is okay. It filled up my Pokedex slots, and you win some, you lose some. Although making a mistake like that on grid would for sure destroy your chances at a leaderboard position. Now we have Psychic Middle Evolution. There are a couple of these. Psychic is actually a pretty difficult type. There's not a lot that are, super obvious. So the ones we had for this were Dottler, Metang, Mr. Mime, Galar, Cosmoem, Hatterim, Gothorita, Duosion, Curlia, and Kadabra. Kadabra is a cop-out a little bit, and I hate saying cop-out because I'd hate to offend anybody listening. But you really, there is much easier to think of, and I think that's just one of those picks of a casual player. You can, I'd say at the very least Duosion and Curlia are great, but even then, I say all that about Kadabra, but I look at this list, and if you're not a experienced seasoned person, this is a difficult list. It's not easy to think of any of these. Nobody knows that Mr. Mime is actually a middle evolution in Galar. This isn't simple by any means. Cosmoem was actually shockingly rare here, which is interesting because I'm surprised I didn't think of Cosmoem. I think even if I did think of Cosmoem, though, I went with Hatterim, who I kind of disagree with fundamentally as a Pokemon. Again, it's one of those I keep in mind because I don't like how Hatterini has 3 stages. I think it's stupid. I think, you look at the baby whatever comes before Hatterim, and you just think, why is that? Why is that even there? Why not just let me catch Hatterim? Hatterim already is a little baby. Who knows? I don't understand it. But yeah, some really great picks here. There's a pretty steep decline. It goes 15, 13, 10, down to 5, and then from there it's super pretty simple. I'd say there's like those 3 thresholds. Like there's Kadabra in the League of His Own, Kirlia, Duosion, Gotharita, and maybe Hatterim, who all kind of are either new or iconic enough where they're pretty understandable. And Duosion is a pretty popular mono psychic type. He's Gen 5. I think he's pretty iconic. I think a lot of people are going to go with those. I try as hard as I can to stay away from Duosion and the rest of that line. I'm not going to try to pronounce the last one. Dottler, great though. I mentioned him on a podcast not too long ago. Dottler's a good one. He gets the psychic type before he hits stage 3. I wish there was patterns here that I could tell you, but some of these you just have to know. Metang was a great one though, and I think definitely one of those where a lot of people could have gotten that. It's just you see that and you're like, oh, Metang, duh. But it's not how it happened, and that's okay. 92% of people got this. This isn't super difficult. Yes, it's a small list, but there's a good chance you can at least think of Kadabra. So it's pretty easy to at least escape. And finally, we have, funny enough, Psychic Ghost. I remember talking about this on the podcast. It might have been yesterday or the day before. I was like, I know all 4 Psychic Ghost type picks. And what do you know? They got it. It's here today, Psychic Ghost. There's only 4 of these, and 2 of them if you want to kind of merge Necrozma and Lunala. So we have, of course, Necrozma, who I tell you to remember every day. If you didn't get this box because you couldn't think Necrozma, I'm a little bit mad at you. It's okay, though. That's why you're here, and we'll go over it at the end, too. Hoopa was the most popular. Hoopa is a Psychic Ghost type. It's a mythical. It's pretty iconic. But Lunala and Calyrex Shadow. Lunala was also pretty popular. It kind of dips. Hoopa and Lunala are, again, in that kind of league of their own. But it dips another 10% down to Calyrex Shadow at 17, Necrozma at 15. I did actually think about Necrozma. I mean, of course I did. I think about Necrozma every time I see Psychic. But I just thought Calyrex Shadow would be a little bit rare. I wanted to kind of sauce it up, and in the process, I looked stupid. And I didn't pick who I always claim is the GOAT and the best pick ever. But hey man, what advice can I give you on Psychic Ghost? If you didn't get Psychic Ghost, I'm just disappointed in you. As a listener, I'm sorry. That's the meanest I'm going to be on this. I'm a little disappointed in you. At the end of every episode, you need to be staying to the end. I'll tell you every time. And we'll go over it today. Don't worry. Necrozma. Study the Necrozma forms. Might be the sentence I've said the most in my entire life. Regardless, it's a lower score average than yesterday, and I can definitely understand why. Even this bottom right box has 72% guessed correctly. And I know, like, I can go here and I can say, oh, I'm disappointed in you if you didn't get this. This is easy. But this is a really, really hard box to get unless you're kind of, as a casual. Like, this is, I think, pretty simple. And, I mean, surely if you've put, a little bit of, thought, or dare I say it, training into Doku and Grid, it's doable, and all of these like type combinations should be doable, but this is a hard box, man. That casuals never. I mean, Lunala would be the closest grasp, but Hoopa and Lunala are even then not super obvious. And even if you know who Lunala is, you don't know Lunala's Psychic Ghost. That's a very interesting typing. So, not the easiest grid ever, and trade by Evo is just foul. It's foul. But we get through it. I hope that some of the things I've said today will help you get through it. And remember, it's okay to compromise. As much as I say cop out all the time, and I hate doing it because it is okay to compromise. I compromised the hell out of my Alakazam pick, and that's okay. That is okay. Okay, Doku. Maybe tomorrow won't have some vicious evolve by trade or evolve by friendship or evolve by item parameter. But, knock on wood. Let's hope not. Regardless, let's get to the grid for today. A pretty good one. Okay, we have our grid for today, and it is a pretty fun one. As you can see by my box, we have a full ultra rare grid today. I mean, how excellent. This is the title grid. I love all the pink. It's a pretty good day. As much as all pink doesn't, scream the best of the best, I'm actually 14th in the world. I believe I was 16th right before I started this recording. So moving up in the world. It's a really fun day. And it's one of those days that I think definitely it's kind of like a psychic ghost on Doku where this benefits the grid player who's a little bit more seasoned, kind of knows these niche boxes because this is where it gets you. This is where it gets you on that nicheness. Or even then, like I think if we could see these like how steep these declines in popularity are on the Grid website, I think it would be pretty astounding how much this knowledge benefits you. Like let's just skip ahead. For example, Marowak. I used last in evolution line Gen 1. Knowing those like thing, I mean everyone knows Marowak, but do you know did you put him? Probably not. And you probably got over 1% on this box. It is knowing those little things like that, like Marowak, that allow you to not just get the box, but you set yourself apart. Everyone can think of a last in evolution line Gen 1, but fortune favors the bold and the person who can put in that pick that is just never going to, cross somebody's mind. Anyways, let's start it out. A little bit of a yap there. We're starting with Dark Monotype, and again, I know I just said a lot of things that weren't about the single box itself, but Dark is a really, really difficult type. It has a shockingly few Pokemon, and I don't know if it has the least Pokemon, but I would say it definitely has such a like not that popular lineup that it sort of feels like it has the least Pokemon. If you asked me to name another Dark type that was last in evolution line that wasn't Thievul or Mightyena, I might fold a little bit. I mean, it is not easy. So listen and listen good because I'm about to help you as much as I can with the fabled Dark type and how really, really rough it is. Starting out, we have Mono Dark. I stole this from the leaderboard, I'm not going to lie. I finished my grid. I went to the leaderboard. Maschiff was way less common, and I undid my pick and picked Maschiff. I went with Nickit here. There's a couple picks you could do, and the first one is... Sorry, I'm running out of breath here. The first most obvious would be Darkrai to everybody, and of course it was. It was 13%. Darkrai is the Dark type, and again, when I was getting into these grids early on and I would see something like a Monotype Dark, I would literally sit there for 5 minutes trying to think of anything besides stupid Darkrai, and I just couldn't. Dark puts you in such a mental hard place. It is a really, really challenging one. But I, at some point, became kind of obsessed with Thievul and Nickit, or I should say Nickit and Thievul, who are an evolution line. They're Mono Dark. They are Gen 8. So not only are they, pretty consistent, I mean, it's nice to have a Mono Dark, two of them. It's definitely very consistent. You can use it pretty often in a lot of situations. But it's newer, so a lot of people don't know it as well. So I was able to put Nickit there and Thievul later on. Maschiff is a good one, though. Just try not to use Darkrai. There's a couple things you could do. Persian and Meowth's Alolan forms are both pure Dark type. Liepard is a pretty not so obvious pure Dark type. I'm a little shocked that it doesn't have any normal in it. But all of the best ones were Nickit, anything in Mabostiff's line, stuff like that. Yeah, that's really all I can say. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more to go off of, but also maybe there isn't a lot more. I'm really not sure. There's not a lot of mono Dark types. It is a pretty scarce list. I think Dark is definitely one of those secondary typings. You'll see something like, I mean, think Hydreigon, right? Like that is a dragon who is dark. Think Garchomp. That is a dragon that it has ground elements to it. I think you don't see a dark type with a type that kind of, adds some seasoning. Dark is the seasoning type. You put dark after a main type to kind of help something stand out more. Incineroar is a dark type, but that's a fire type with the dark typing. It might sound like I'm rambling and being crazy here, but dark type isn't its own thing. It definitely feels like an addition a lot of the time, which I'm sure is why there isn't that many monotype dark types. Usually it's a dark fighter or something. You get my point. Moving on though, we have dark and weak to electric. Now, because dark is as I said before, a seasoning type, I might start using that more often. It's pretty easy. You just have to think of a dark water type or a dark flying type, and I think that's all. Am I crazy for thinking that's all electric is super effective against? We're going to go with water and flying for now. I picked a dark flying type, but Yeah, this one kind of ran away with just 4s and 5%. It's one of those boxes where you're never going to feel really that great in general. Crawdont, Iron Jugulus, Bombardier is a higher one. I wouldn't use that. And Moltres Galarian. And um, Mega Gyarados, who I used just yesterday, who I remember mentioning that is not a Dragon type. Mega Gyarados is a Dark type. That one also had 5%. I mean, it's all kind of a toss up here. I'm not gonna say Iron Jugulus is better than Samurai Hisuian because he has 1 less percent. I went with Iron Jugulus. I've kind of had. I know I say this with about a million Pokemon, but I have kind of had like a fixation on Iron Jugulus. I use Paradox Pokemon quite often, and Iron Jugulus is one of my favorite to use because of his super duper unique typing. He's probably the least. If there was a grid that needed a Dark Flying type, I bet Iron Jugulus would be the least picked option. It's just like, why does his type? I mean, it's not stupid to say why does his type change, but flying, it's interesting. It's interesting and it's weird, and I like it. Iron Jugulus is a really fun pick. Use him more often. It's a dark flying type. He's a flying type. Is probably a better thing I can say. Dark last in evolution line is our next box. There's again, man, there's not a lot. You have Persian, Alolan. Malamar is a really great one. I went with Thievul, as mentioned before, who was, I believe, tied with. Oh, sorry. I take it back. Greninja is the number one with 1%. And that's crazy because Greninja is Greninja. Everyone knows Greninja. But again, everyone knows Greninja as the water type. You watch the anime, you're not going to say, oh, Greninja's the dark one. No, it's not. It's a water type. It's a water type that has the dark typing. So you're not going to immediately think of Greninja. You're not going to immediately think of low kicks because that's a bug. You're not immediately going to think of Skuntank because that's poison. You're not immediately going to think of King Gambit because King Gambit is a steel blade. I mean, I could go on forever. Dark type last in evolution line, not super difficult and also not a super diverse thing. Most popular here we have 9% and mine was 2. There are some on this leaderboard with 3, some with 4 even. So it's not a super big deal. Even Hydreigon was 2%. It's not super difficult to with just some base level grid knowledge, I would say, be able to get this top row pretty simply. But I think that's all we have to go over for Dark. Try to learn more. If I can leave you with anything, Thievul and Nickit and Iron Jugulus. And that should get you through, and Eradicate Alolan, that should get you through most dark things that are going to be inquired about. Moving on, Monotype normal. There's a couple. Kangaskhan. I mean, I think first and foremost, the most popular was Kangaskhan at 4%. My pick, which got me to 14th in the world, has 2. So, Skitty has 1. Exploud has under 1. Bunnelby has under 1. Herdier has under 1. Porygon, Minccino, Greedent, Herdier, Porygon Z, Wooloo, Kecleon has 2%. It's a pretty simple one. I went with Type Null. I've always liked Type Null. I need to stop saying that I'm obsessed with using certain Pokemon, but I like using Type Null. I use Type Null quite often, and I use Silvally probably even more often, and I'll use it later. One of those situations also, and I have this problem all the time. This is all too common. I'll see Monotype normal, and I'll think, oh my gosh, I love Silvally. I'm going to put Silvally there. And then I put Silvally there, and then I look to the right, and it says last in evolution line normal. And I think, man, I hate myself. Why did I do that? So I put Type Null there. Please, if you want to use your last in evolution line later, be careful. I do that all the time with the Trumbeak and Toucannon line. But not a super difficult one, and dig a little deep. But even if you pick Kangaskhan or Snorlax, they are just around 4%. So not a super big deal, but that's not a good mindset to have. Be different. Try to be different. We have weak to electric normal, so we're looking for normal water or normal flying. Gun to my head, name a normal water type. I'm folding. I don't. It might exist. I don't know. I'm not gonna try to verify that it does. Hoot Hoot was good here. Noctowl, Fearow, Swablu. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, Swablu is not a dragon type. Swablu is a normal flying type who evolves into a dragon flying type. Picky Peck is a normal flying type. Squawkabilly Green is a normal flying type. I went with Toucanon. I use Toucanon and Trumbeak. Well, it feels like every day I play these stupid grids. Um, I kind of usually use Trumbeak. I decided to do Toucanon. Let's have some fun today. The most popular. Oh, by Barrel was the most popular, and he is a normal water type. It's a pretty fun one. It's actually shocking. I mean, I'd be pretty proud of myself if I thought of something like by Barrel. That's one of those things where it's all perspective. Maybe you're looking at this and you think, "What, Mason? Are you an idiot?" But of course, by Barrel is the most popular, and we're different players. We're different players, and that's sometimes why I think I have to hold myself back on this podcast and not act like I'm the all-knowing, because we've all had different experiences with this. And that's the most important. That's the most important part. But yeah, by Barrel being most common, that is just really unfortunate, and I don't know how to advise against an unfortunate situation like that. Lastly, we have normal and last in evolution line. Again, gotta stop saying again. There's a million different things to do. Raticate Alolan, who I just talked about. Ursulina Bloodman. Ursulina Bloodman? I guess, yeah. I don't really think there's a way to evolve into him, if I'm not mistaken. But Ursulina, Arvola, Purugly, Bibarel, Unpheasant, Toucanon, Dunsparce, or the Dunsparce, Zoroark, Hisuian. I went with Silvally because I use Silvally a lot. I use Type Null on my left side. It was on my mind. Silvally's a good one. Use Silvally if you can more. I believe it learns Icy Wind. That's some random trivia, but we had a Type Null Tuesday one day, and Type Null and Silvally learned Icy Wind. So, maybe I should just start throwing in fun facts like that every day on here. I don't know. Maybe it'll come up later, or maybe not, because there's no new grids. But let's move on before I get too off topic. Monotype Gen 1. There's a couple. The most popular was 4%, so don't pull your hair out. Coughing, Ekans, Porygon, Seadra, Krabby, Hitmonlee, Sandshrew, Nidorina. There's a lot. The Nidos are actually pretty interesting. Nidoking and Nidoqueen gain the ground typing on their final evolution, so feel free to use Nidorina and Nidorino as middle type evolutions that are monotype and monopoison, which is also not a super common typing. I went with Cubone, which, again, I mean, everything in a Gen 1 category is going to be like, oh, obviously Cubone. But there is ways to be good at the game in a Gen 1 category. I mean, it is the most, highest level of caring about your percents. Unless you're, going for really, really great leaderboard spots, doesn't really matter in Gen 1. Again, the most popular was 4% in the bottom left. But, man, if you really want that, you can really try for it. It's the same thing with Gen 1 Weak to Electric. There are a couple Gen 1 water types, but a couple Gen 1 flying types. Butterfree, Scyther, Vaporeon, Poliwag, Amistar, Farfetch'd, Seal. Branch out with it. I went with Articuno, which was actually a pretty popular pick compared to everything I just said. Yeah, there's a lot. Just please don't go Blastoise line. And I think besides that, you're gonna do good. And again, the most popular was 5%, and one of the best grids in the world today had a 3% Articuno. So do whatever you like, really. But last up for the day, we have Gen 1 Last in Evolution line. And this is just what I was talking about earlier, and we kind of spoiled this at the start. I went with Marowak. There is ways to be good at things that you would just think are random. Again, the most popular is Blastoise at 5%, so don't pull your hair out, as I said. But Jolteon, Venomoth, Mr. Mime, Slowbro, Dugtrio, Hitmonlee, Amistar, Arbok. All great picks. I went with Marowak. I've liked using Marowak. I was introduced to it by a great friend, and since then, I wasn't introduced to Marowak. I was introduced to the idea of using Marowak on PokeGrid, and I wouldn't throw it away for a second. I love Marowak. All in all, not a super difficult grid. This is one of those, it's a very interesting grid, specifically this bottom layer, but you can sort of see it in the normal monotype 2 and normal last in evolution line. Besides the most popular, this is going to be a pretty obvious one. Pretty obvious to do good. It is not, extremely competitive. If you pick one that isn't the most common, it's probably going to be pretty rare. I'm not going to grasp at straws thinking, well, who was more likely to think Zapdos than Articuno or Marowak than Golduck, right? I mean, they're all going to be super rare. And as long as you can just do the bare minimum and set yourself apart, you'll get a really good score and beat all your friends on the leaderboard. Now, if you want to get to the leaderboard, it takes a little bit more hair splitting, and I guess that's kind of what I imagine was the purpose of this podcast, was those really hair splitting, down to the most precise levels. How can you really optimize your play? But again, maybe I just sound stupid, and I think I'm a genius for picking Iron Jugulus, and it's not even that good. It's not even that good. That's the life of the grid. And dude, some days I miss one or two boxes. Again, there's days where you do great, there's days where you don't great. I think you need to find your own personal, strategies, and not everything I tell you is going to be the way you have to approach something. But if you want to start using these strategies thinking, one of my favorite is how I always preach, think of a category. Think of, I don't know, think of your favorite starters, or think of your favorite regional birds or something like that. And then you'll get on the topic of regional birds, and then you'll find something that you need for maybe normal, weak to electric, right? It's little things like that. But for all the hair splitting stuff, I think today's grid is definitely a nice look into, or a nice opportunity for a lot of people who aren't super great at this to definitely have that prideful point in themselves where it's like, wait a minute, I am still a little bit different. That's why I love these super broad ones where there's a million different picks and they're all just about as common, because it really gives everyone that opportunity to feel like they can do something. And when it's something as easy as Gen 1, even the worst grid player ever might be able to think of, oh, Marowak, the really sad one whose mom dies in the anime. I know that. I know that. And look, I got 1%. It's the best one in the world. That's great. I love when grids are like that. And I think that's kind of the joy of the grid to me, and the joy of the whole focus on points and leaderboards. I think it's nice. But not to get all preachy about grid, we might not even be covering it in the coming months. So that'll be all. Overall, though, great Doku, great grid. 3 days in a row of the podcast. If there's anything you take away, Iron Jugulus, Thievul, and Nickit will get you through just about any dark question that ever gets asked. And, of course, and let's go over it in detail today. Necrozma has 4 forms. Base Necrozma, who is a mono-psychic type. Necrozma Dawn, who is a psychic ghost type. Necrozma Dusk, who is a psychic steel type. And Necrozma Ultra, which is a psychic dragon type. They're all psychic types. It gives you a lot of dual types that you can use for, like, if you need a dual type psychic type for a specific thing, there's 3 I just gave you right there. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a pretty good benchmark. And if you need something that's weak to ice, Necrozma Ultra will always get you in that ultra rare pink, or however low you want to go, whatever you want to call it on Doku region. With that being said, that's all I've got. That's all I've got for today. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you very soon for episode 10.